Hello everyone, my guest today is Karthik Sekar, Head of Data Science at Climax Foods, a scientist in metabolomics, and most of all author of the book After Meat, which is a fantastic book on how can we abandon meat as a civilization, possibly, and how can we substitute meat with vegan protein products. So Karthik, if you could show us the cover, maybe.
Yeah.
So this is the book. I will put a link to Amazon because I bought it as an ebook in the Kindle store. So for those who don't use print, I will put the link. Highly recommending the book. And thank you very much, Karthik, for being with us today.
And thank you, Maciej, for having me here. It's an honor, and thank you so much for the kind words.
Karthik, what are the main reasons why we should abandon meat from, let's say, environmental point of view and from moral point of view?
Yes. So, from the environmental point of view, meat production is immensely wasteful and destructive. So, there was actually a recent study that came out last week that actually looked at varying diets of people across the world and looking at high meat consumers versus vegetarians versus vegans. And it's just quite significant just in terms of CO2 savings, in terms of water savings, in terms of nitrogen runoff, that a non-animal product diet is the most impactful as far as beneficial environmental outcomes go. So that's the environmental argument. And then you also asked about the ethical argument. And so I argue in After Meat that what we want to strive for with our morality ultimately is reducing unnecessary suffering. And there are very few industries that generate as much unnecessary suffering as our current animal agriculture institution. I feel that, and I know from the evidence that it's perfectly possible to have a healthy, sustainable, fulfilling life without animal products, and it's more achievable today than ever. And so there's less of a reason that we need to use animals to produce our food.
Do we really need meat as human beings, as some people argue?
I argue no. So we've increasingly demystified meat, especially over the last century. So meat has been part of our history for probably over 100,000 years. So first as hunter gatherers, so humans were especially hunting these large animals collectively, and arguably that's driven a lot of evolution. But we've gotten to a place where we've solved all the problems of hunger, we've solved a lot of problems of nutrition, and we're able to create food much more productively than ever before. And we can create a diversity of food, and we actually understand the biochemical basis for a lot of what we've traditionally gotten from meat. So that's protein, that's vitamins such as zinc and B12. And now we can source all those nutrients from places other than animal products, and we can have perfectly nutritious normal lives without it.
Historically, we didn't eat that much meat. Let's say it was something that people used to eat, let's say, on some festive occasions, some special occasions like weddings or this kind of days. And definitely we didn't eat meat every day, as some, let's say, meat-oriented food cultures propagate today.
Yeah.
So it's whether someone's vegan, vegetarian, or a meat eater, it's definitely at least reducing meat, which is extremely important from environmental point of view. What are the main myths, let's say, that we shouldn't eat genetically modified food, because I mean this protein substituting meat is genetically modified anyway. It's artificial in a way.
Yes. So there are two aspects here. So one is substituting meat, and just sort of like, we've historically had meat, and so we're substituting with something else. And so I do want to be clear that we don't necessarily need to do genetic modification to substitute meat. So a really good example of this is Beyond Meat, where they take protein directly from peas, and then they isolate it, and then they're able to make burgers or sausages out of them. And in the case of Impossible Foods, there is, especially in the EU definition for GMO, it is a little bit more of a gray area, where Impossible sees heme protein as being important for the flavor and giving it especially that very, very bloody, irony taste in their burgers. And so, yes, they take the gene for the heme protein, they put it into microbes, they grow up in microbes, isolate the heme protein, and then put that. And in terms of definitions, yes, that is GMO in the EU, but it's not in the United States. But the EU doesn't consider it GMO because it's molecularly identical to the heme that it eventually where it originally comes from, which is a soy plant. And so GMO doesn't necessarily mean eating things that we haven't eaten before. It might change the way we produce things. It might make things safer. It might make things more harmful. It might not do anything. The details absolutely matter, and we can't necessarily say GMO is bad or good. We have to look at each case individually.
I'm not a big fan of burgers, though I like a burger from time to time. And here where I live in Poland, we don't have really vegan burgers at McDonald's. So there is a veggie burger at McDonald's, but it's really crappy. It's not a substitute of meat. It's something really not very great. But we do have this burgers tastings that are like real burgers, both at Burger King and at a Swedish chain called Max. And Max, it's really fantastic. And you cannot really tell that it's not meat at all. So in your book, I remember the part when you said that after dropping meat, you didn't have a burger for, I don't know, 10 years. And after that, when you had a burger, it didn't taste good at all.
Yeah.
And this Beyond Burger, right? But let's say it really strikes me, and this is the question where I'm getting at, is, let's say, how do they do it? How do they do it that, let's say, at Max, that it tastes like really great, like you cannot tell that it's not a beef. At Burger King, you can tell that it's not a real Whopper, though it's good.
Yeah. So what I really love about the modern alternative food industry, and I work at such a company, is that there's a very scientific approach to studying just the cause and effect of especially flavor. And in the case of burgers, and so you're alluding to the story in After Meat, where I talk about having the Impossible burger for the first time, and it had been more than 10 years since I had a beef burger. And I thought the Impossible burger was honestly kind of gross when I first had it. I thought I bit my lip and my mouth was bleeding, but apparently that's the taste of burgers. I just had forgotten. And so to do this, so to get the flavor as close as possible, the first aspect to know is just the biochemistry of how we experience flavor. So there's the gustation component of flavor, which is our basic taste senses. So there's the salt that gives the saltiness. There's maybe some acids that give it the sourness. There's the amino acids that give it the umami flavor. And so those are receptors on our tongue that directly bind to the chemical compounds and give it that signal for those experiences of taste. And then the other aspect is retronasal. So as we chew food, we release odors, and then the odors travel to the back of our nose, and then bind to receptors there, and that gives us the experience of richer flavors. So things like beefiness or cheesiness. And if you're interested in trying this, I recommend when you eat a food the next time, try closing your nose like this. Both close it for a few seconds and then release it, and you should be able to tell a difference between the flavor of the food based off of what's retronasal versus what's gustation. And all these compounds, so these flavor compounds, so in the case of something like burgers, caproic acid is a key flavor compound. Caproic acid is measurable by analytical chemistry instrumentation. So what companies like Impossible Foods is doing is they're measuring, for example, the amount of caproic acid in beef burgers, and then they're also measuring the amount in their formulations. And then they're trying to get these as close as possible. And so their hypothesis is that if we match these compounds, then we also match the flavor.
Right. With this vegan revolution, I think that we are encountering some very new flavors that we didn't have before. I'm just wondering, let's say, how difficult it is for us humans, to get accustomed to new flavors and the new kinds of food. This is also something you discussed in your book with this Scandinavian licorices, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, or is it? Do you believe, let's say, that we can get accustomed to some absolutely new kind of tastes and cuisines, or we need to produce vegan food imitating tastes that we know?
Yeah. I love this question because I think it gets to the core of how I think differently about the alternate food space versus a lot of the rest of the industry. So I first like to look back at the history of food and just sort of the different foods that we ate over time. And I don't think most people appreciate that most of the foods we eat today are fairly recent. And a really good example of this is the tomato. So tomatoes were quote unquote discovered in the New World, so meaning North South America, and only around the 15th century by European explorers. And initially, people didn't actually eat tomatoes because they thought they were poisonous because they looked like other nightshade, because they are a nightshade. And so people thought they looked cool, but they actually didn't eat them, and so they were grown for decorative purposes. But then around the 19th century, people actually started trying to cook with tomatoes, and so then you
Only
started to get
19th
like
century.
only 19th century, yeah,
Incredible. Because let's say I cannot imagine, for instance,
Italian food, yeah,
or an Indian curry.
yeah, exactly. So Italian food, Indian curries, even things like ketchup, right? These weren't around as recently as 300 years ago. And I would even describe these as a fairly distinctive flavor than anything else around. And so my thesis with the alternate food revolution is that we don't win by doing things in the same way. So making burgers exactly the same or making chicken breasts exactly the same. I see it as us coming up with these new foods and these new flavors that are unlike anything we've had before, but were just never possible with using animals. And so the example I give in After Meat is like a hybrid of chicken and cheese, where you have something that's that can kind of be melted, but it's chewier than normal cheese and has like a lot of protein and very nutritionally rich compared to normal cheese. And that's something that I would love to eat.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting, at least. Uh, how does it work, producing vegan food nowadays? From the technology
Yeah.
perspective, I mean, food processing technology, because I think that
Yes. Yes, there's a lot of different techniques and approaches to producing these modern foods. So we've been talking a lot about Impossible and Beyond, and that's just isolating plant proteins. A lot of the work there is, for example, in the case of pea protein, how do you isolate that protein? How do you deodorize it so that it doesn't have these weird off flavors, and then formulate it into, say, a burger? So I would call that the plant-based approach. There's cultivated meat. So cultivated meat is trying to basically reproduce the same sort of chicken breast or steak by taking stem cells from cows or chickens and then just growing them up in bioreactors into a full chicken breast that can then be cooked. And I'm wary about that approach, but happy to talk more about that in a bit. Third approach is fermentation. So fermentation is using microbes, and this is a big emphasis of After Meat. I think fermentation, in terms of just potential and production metrics, is just too potent to ignore. And fermentation works with microbes such as baker's yeast. So for anyone who's baked bread or brewed beer, you've worked with these yeast that will eat sugar, produce CO2, and so forth. And so there's been more modern companies that are also working with microbes to actually produce protein mass and then to make, say, meat or dairy from that. And then there's a little bit of a fourth approach. I don't know if it's really worth talking about that much, but some people are calling it molecular farming. So this is a GMO approach of taking genes, for example, taking the gene for casein, which is an important dairy protein, putting that into plants and then growing those plants and then harvesting the casein protein.
Can we move back to what you said, that you don't like this approach with
Cultivated meat.
cultivating meat?
Yeah.
It's, let's say, because of ethical grounds, or?
Yeah, actually, it's not ethical grounds. I see it akin to us going back to the 19th century and trying to replace horses with robotic horses. I think we're ignoring how we do technological progress. I think we don't have to do exactly the same in order to move on. I would much rather we put our efforts toward things that are just really good and really amazing, and they're just going to attract people, regardless if they're the same as what they've eaten before. And I just see cultivated meat as being a little too hard and too much like a robotic horse. Like even a robotic horse today would be very difficult to develop. And so in a similar vein, I think it's just going to take way too much time, and ultimately in the long run, we might not even want to keep going with it, right? So let's say we even achieve a very affordable cultivated meat in, say, a decade, right? Well, what if we're able to do something way better with plant-based or fermentation, right? So then it would have been kind of a waste of time.
In your book, you mentioned that or at least I understood it so, that we don't need as much protein as we eat today.
Yeah.
Even with this all very trendy paleo diets and.
Yep. Yes. So there's been a lot of calculations on just how much protein people need today, and honestly, I even defer to, for example, like the WHO and the equivalent organization in the United States of just all this research just showing how much protein we actually need. And the truth is, we don't need that much. So I am probably about 75 kilos, and I probably need about 60 grams of protein a day, which is honestly not that much. If I ate nothing but potatoes, I would get enough protein.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So let's move now to what Climax Foods does, and how AI helps us in inventing new tastes,
Yep.
or imitate
Yep.
tastes we know in vegan form.
Yep. Yeah. So Climax Foods is where I work, and now my day job is working as head of data science to help lead our data science efforts to innovate our foods much faster. And so Climax Foods, in the categorization of what I was talking about before, of the different pillars of the different alternative foods, is technically plant-based. So we focus exclusively on the plant-based world and trying to find plant-based alternatives to specifically dairy and specifically cheese. And so to that end, we've been I would say fairly successful. We have if your audience goes to our website, they can see the pretty amazing specialty cheeses that we have. Our blue cheese is actually now
Michelin
available to
chef
the.
recommended
That's
one
right. That's
visit,
right.
and
That's
a
right.
French lady, right? So she needs to know some cheese.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. We are Michelin chef recommended, and we are actually serving our cheese in Michelin star restaurants. And it was awarded best new vegan product by Veg News. And I even had the opportunity to go to France and serve it to French journalists, and they were actually quite complimentary about our cheese. And as you can imagine, they're probably the most the most skeptical. And so our approach is to use machine learning to help us innovate much faster. And so to that end, we have a system where we make prototypes, and then we characterize those prototypes on things that a consumer might care about. So it might be the flavor, it might be the texture, it might be the affordability, it might be nutrition, and we are building toward to be able to do everything simultaneously. And then we build models to figure out what led to what. So if it's the amount of an ingredient or a certain process parameter, then we can make recommendations for the next round of prototypes. And so the idea here is just to become very efficient with our prototyping process, and to make sure that we learn as much as possible, and then that we're able to reach optimal prototypes as quickly as possible too.
Can AI help us to get to know what people like to eat? To invent new
Yeah,
tastes, for instance.
the new taste question is hard. So right now we are using, even though I've spoken a lot about how, long run, we need to get to these newer foods that people don't have any precedent before for. But for now, just because it makes the data science problem much easier, we use dairy cheese often as the target. So what I was talking about before about, we can measure the flavor compounds in, say, dairy cheese. We can measure the flavor compounds in our cheese and figure out how to get closer by basically getting the flavor profiles to be as close as possible. And in terms of novel flavors, yeah, that's a really good question. We in the long run, I'm certainly hoping for something like a chat GPT for recipe creation. And it's gonna require a lot of data, so it's gonna require just a lot of recipes and just a lot of assessment of those recipes, of people saying like how good those recipes are. And then once we've generated enough data, yeah, maybe. But I'll be honest in that I don't actually have a straightforward idea to how to associate people's preferences to find new tastes.
I'm a fan of trying out ethnic cuisines,
Yeah.
and at some point we've had quite a lot of ethnic cuisines here in Warsaw.
Yeah.
One of my favorites was Ethiopian, which was near my office, and after COVID, 80% of these restaurants disappeared.
Yeah.
And only Polish and Italian and Indian, which is the most popular ethnic cuisine outside of Polish and Italian, only those three remained. So this and very many new Polish traditional restaurants sprang out.
Yeah.
So it worries me kind of that after COVID, it seemed like people, stuck much stronger to what they know and don't want to try out anything new in
Yeah.
terms of eating. I love to cook, and I consider myself a foodie. So this is something that really worries me, also in the context of vegetarianism, veganism.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
The same thing happened here. So during COVID, a lot of vegan restaurants that just opened right before COVID. And I should say I live in Berkeley, Oakland area of California. And yeah, I know probably about 5 restaurants off the top of my head that ended up closing because of COVID and just weren't able to survive. You know, and I'm not entirely sure what the reason is. I know that one thing that happened was that there's sort of this like novelty effect that helps for a little bit of time, where you know, like a new restaurant opens and then people are very interested, and you know, maybe it's a new ethnic cuisine, and they'll try it for, and then they'll be doing okay for the few months, but then the novelty effect wears off, and then yeah, people retreat back to what they know. And I know that's happened in the alternative food world. I know this is something that Impossible Foods has happened to them, where you know, people don't want to keep paying 3 times the price for their burgers compared to cow burgers. And once the novelty factor has worn off, like, you
This is
know, they're
the
not going to.
difference in the US.
Yeah, yeah,
So here, I'd say this is the same price.
yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, meat is just very subsidized in the United States. So so it really should be about, so I think meat right now is about $12 per kilo for beef, but without the subsidies, it would be closer to $50 per kilo.
So here, good beef is $15 plus,
Yeah,
up to $20, up to $30.
yeah, yeah. And I know there's subsidies
So
in
I
the
don't need beef at all.
yeah, in the EU too. And yeah, this price difference has been really hard for especially these companies. But yeah, I think what that means is, in the long run, yeah, just focusing more on affordability. This is something that we hear routinely in our market analysis, that if we want to reach more people, we have to get it more forward. We have to get the food more affordable.
Can AI and machine learning help us to invent better food in terms of nutrition? Can it help us to solve this problem of poverty? You quote Jeffrey Sachs in your book that still 10% of humanity lives in utter poverty, which means that they worry if they survive the next day.
Yeah.
Still in the year 2023. So is it possible that, let's say, with current possibilities of producing alternative foods and machine learning, we can, you know, invent something that is much more nutritious than what we have at our disposal today to solve this utter poverty problem?
Yes, yes, I think absolutely. And so one of my emphasis in After Meat is that it's hard to do these things using animals, because animals are just so limiting as a technology. Like it just takes so much resources. It takes a long time. It's actually hard to innovate on animals, but it's actually much easier to innovate on plant and microbial food. And so, in my view, something especially like fermentation, microbial fermentation technology, has really the opportunity to basically solve all of our starvation problems, and also, while doing so very affordably. I posit this idea of having bioreactors in villages, and you know, just letting people be able to grow their food. I'm not sure how realistic that is, but just sort of giving people some imagination to what's actually possible. And yeah, I think in terms of the role of AI, so one way that we do it is by constraining our model. So we might add a constraint to our model to say that we want a certain level of protein content. So any formulations that we make need to be at least 10-20% protein, depending on what we're targeting. And then we can also likewise do the same thing with cost. So we can add some sort of constraint and just say, okay, the raw ingredient cost can't be more than this price. And I see machine learning and AI as only helping in those efforts.
Yeah, so I really like this vision with this bioreactors. As you said in your book, that some NGOs are sending goats to this mine endangered places, whether it would be far more efficient to send bioreactors.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. We're still far away from that, but maybe one day, maybe in 10, 20 years.
yeah. Karthik, thank you so much for this conversation. It was a pleasure. I think it opens up eyes to many of us. As I told you before the conversation, I'm a kind of lazy pescatarian.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's bacon out of pure laziness and out of the fact that I come from a heavily meat-dependent native cuisine. But this book, moved me very much and made an impact that I definitely will try to not to be so lazy and stick to veggie products way more consequentially. So definitely this is the way to go, and it's also quite amazing what you do at Climax Foods. So thank you so much again for having you.
Thank you. And thanks, Maciej, for reaching out and hosting me and reading after meat. And this was so much fun. And I sincerely appreciate the opportunity.
Link to After Meat on Amazon in the comment.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Sherpa Search on Tech. If you have enjoyed the show, please subscribe to our show wherever you listen. Thanks again. The Sherpa Search on Tech podcast is a production of Sherpa Search, an executive search firm specializing in the tech industry, helping hire the right people for expert and managerial positions, and advising how to build and develop long-lasting, high-performing IT teams. If you would like to learn more, reach out to us at maciej.szczerba@sherpasearch.tech or visit our website sherpasearch.tech. See you next time.